Hey there, welcome to the Jeff and Heidi Show, where you're going to have the opportunity to listen to and learn from everyday entrepreneurs. All right, welcome to the Jeff and Heidi Show. Jeff Hagee and Heidi Anderson. Glad to be with you today, and we're excited about today's episode. We've got Alyssa Carson with us, and I don't want to give too much away by an introduction. I want to let her do that, but I am going to just read something about her, and it'll tell a lot about what we're going to talk about. She says, ever since she was a little girl, Alyssa has had her heart set on the stars. At only 3 years old, she told her father, "Daddy, I want to be an astronaut and be one of the people who goes to Mars." He had no idea that this seemingly offhand statement would actually become the birth of a meaningful lifelong endeavor. So welcome. Glad to have you here. You've got an amazing story, and you've got an amazing story still ahead of you to be developed, and we're excited about that. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and give us an introduction.
Yeah, kind of like what you said. I mean, when I was super young, I just kind of had this fascination with space and started talking about space. And no one in my family really had a science or space background. So it was definitely out of the blue. And it was definitely bizarre for my family to start hearing about all these things about space. But yeah, I was basically just interested in going to space just because I was curious what was out there. No one had been to Mars before. So I was like, hey, why not go? Anything is possible. And so it was just kind of all these big ideas that eventually turned into wanting to become an astronaut and actually looking to see at different ways and how you actually do that and what all that means. So really just started out by learning as much as I could about space and the process of becoming an astronaut and what that actually meant. And the more I learned about stuff, the more I wanted to do it.
That is very cool. And I mean, I know Heidi's going to ask you some questions a little bit about some of this, because these were things that you started talking about when you were 3. And we were actually talking earlier about some of these things, and we want to talk to you about. But, okay, first of all, you're 19 years old. Give us a brief history of what you have done to get to the point where you are now and what the future is looking like for you, just so our listeners understand where this is going and where it's been.
Yeah, I mean, the place that I really got started, I mean, I started by getting books and stuff just at home to learn a little bit about space. And then I found out about Space Camp, and Space Camp was really good way for me to just learn so much about space and about the different careers, because in the little simulated missions, I could play different positions, and I kind of figured out what kind of career I would want to go into by pretending to be all these different kind of roles of astronauts, and then learning just all kinds of things about space and space history. And then I had also realized I also wanted to do scuba diving. So when I was 14, I started scuba diving. I now have my advanced scuba certification. And then when I was 15 is when I started more realistic things rather than just camp. So I joined Project Possum, which is just citizen scientists, so everyday people contributing to some kind of science. And so a lot of their work is dealing with understanding the upper atmosphere, but we also test spacesuits. So with that, I've been able to do microgravity flight, water survival training, G-force training, a lot of different things with spacesuits, IVA spacesuits, EVA spacesuits. And so all of that was also building skills, as well as working on my pilot's license. So I recently got my pilot's license. The next step with that would be going to my instrument rating. And so that was kind of what I was planning on doing this summer. But obviously with all things going on, we'll see how that works out. But yeah, they're still, I guess, just continuing to build on the skills and things that I've done so far. So for example, like with my pilot's license, moving on to my instrument with Project Possum, I'll continue doing courses, whether it's a geology course. And of course, there were other things like here and there, going to Iceland and hiking through lava tubes, or little things like that, that just kind of connected to space in very little ways.
You are amazing. I was telling Jeff before we got on this call, I said, I feel like a little school kid is getting ready to meet a celebrity. And honestly, I'm like so excited. And I have a sister whose daughter is 17, And she, you know, so I said, look who we're getting ready to interview this young lady. And she said, can we watch it? I said, well, it's going to be recorded. You can watch it later. But I sent her the link to your website. And because I love what you say about like having your dreams, having, you know, and not letting anybody take that away from you. And that's what a lot of, like, her daughter is doing, like this girl up thing. And it's all about, you know, lifting girls up and letting them feel that way. None of that existed when I was a kid. And this came up on our call last week. It was visualization. I didn't learn about visualization or any of that stuff until I was actually a college athlete. How much do you feel of like what you're doing? Like, do you spend a lot of time, you have to, just visualizing what this is going to look like? And when you do visualize going to Mars, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say there's, especially with having a dream that's definitely a lot further down the road, not something that's going to be necessarily happening tomorrow or something that I can necessarily succeed on immediately. I guess, like you said, it is a good bit of visualizing. But I think it's been really cool to be able to like visit different NASA facilities, see the new rocket that they're working on, interact with the people, kind of hear their side of things. And then just kind of being involved in the space program, you kind of feel the passion that everyone who is working on this project has. So that kind of helps in like visualizing it. But yeah, really it's just one crazy rocket ride up to space and then a pretty long mission actually onto Mars and living there and doing experiments and stuff. But ideally it would just be taking a career that you would do normally here on Earth and then applying it to space. So just kind of having my role and doing, you know, the job while we're there. But I kind of think of it just as any other job.
But would that be like living like in the International Space Station and then just going down to Mars? I mean, is there an atmosphere there or do we even know yet?
Yeah, so kind of the idea is that, so there's just going to be a capsule, which is what the astronauts are going to be in. So it's a pretty like small space. So that is like the section that's going to be going to Mars. However, since that space is so small, they're actually coming up with some ideas of like attachments, almost to be like a mini International Space Station, just to give the astronauts a little bit more room to, you know, sleep, eat, work, do any sort of experiments on the way to Mars. But basically, yeah, once we get to Mars, that we would have a component that would detach, go down to the surface, and the other part would just kind of stay orbiting around Mars until we're ready to come back up and then go back. But yeah, going to be a whole bunch of different components involved in it.
So let's put a few things in perspective, because I mean, that last week or a couple weeks ago must have been exciting for you to watch the first launch from U.S. soil since the shuttle. You know, I was watching that with Bob and Doug, and the thing that kind of caught my attention was, you know, they get to the point where they're going 2,700 kilometers an hour, and then I hear them say, and now they've got a 19-hour trip until they get to the International Space Station. And I'm thinking, okay, that, you know, going 2,700 kilometers an hour, I didn't realize it was still going to take 19 hours. How long is it going to take to get to Mars?
Yeah, right now with the current engines that we're planning on using, it's going to be about 6 months to get to Mars. And so that's going to be like, that's about the average time astronauts spend on the International Space Station. So it's going to be about 6 months there. However, we do know that as technology is developing, we actually already know of newer engines that will actually reduce that time to 6 weeks. However, for the first missions to get to Mars, we're going to have to use the older technology because the newer one needs to be, you know, safety tested. It has to, you know, go through all sorts of stages and then implement it into the rocket and all. But yeah, right now it's going to be 6 months, but you know, hopefully we'll be keep going to shorten that more and more and more.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you were obviously just born to be in this time, and like you think about like computers, you know, and like get like the new engines that you're talking about, and how, you know, like what is on our wrist or in our phone used to occupy a huge building, right? And everything just keeps getting more and more condensed and more and speeding up so much, and it's just fascinating because I think the brain power of younger people now is really speeding up too, and it's really it's cool to watch.
Well, and the cool thing is, is the plan the year 2030? Is that what the plan is?
Yeah, so just around the early 2030s is kind of what they're shooting for. So I mean, some people said 2033, but like I said, now that's really set in stone. The hopes is just the early 2030s, which that can obviously shift, closer or further depending on how things are going and how all the different tests go. But before that, right now is the plan is actually to go back to the moon in the next several years. So kind of by the late 2020s, having people going back to the moon and achieving that, and then from then on we'll push to Mars for the early 2030s.
Why is there a need to redo the moon? I'm just kind of curious. Are they just to do it differently, or?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a whole lot of debate. So many people have different ideas as to if we should be going back to the moon, if we should just go to Mars. I think that right now they've kind of settled on going back to the moon just because they're going to be using the rocket that's going to be going to Mars. So the moon is just like an easy way to test that the rocket is working. It can get us somewhere. And so it's just kind of a way to test also like having people on board. We don't just want to stick people, send them 6 months away and hope for the best. So the moon is just kind of like an easy like 3-day trip to where astronauts can make sure everything's running smoothly. They can do any sort of testing needed to prep for missions to Mars. And then also, many people have looked at different resources and stuff that are on the moon and how that can help and what the future of the moon kind of looks like. But for right now, it's mainly just going to be prepping for Mars.
Okay.
The other comment I was going to make, the cool thing about that is if you're looking at the early 2030s to do this, you're going to be using technology that hasn't even been invented yet. So that's really cool. But now, this isn't a question that I have, but I know you've been asked this. Why go to Mars when there's so many things that need to be dealt with here on Earth? I've listened to other podcasts that you've been on, and so I know you've been asked that before.
Yeah, I definitely, the more I've learned about space and learned about Mars, I've learned a whole lot about the benefits of going to Mars. I would definitely say one of the biggest things is that having crazy ideas like wanting to go to Mars pushes humanity in so many ways of trying to achieve something like that. So in doing that, we develop so many new technologies and so many new inventions. I don't think a lot of people realize how much stuff was either invented by the space program or for the space program in some kind of way. There's so many objects, even stuff in our cell phones that everyone uses every single day was kind of part of all the stuff that we had to come up with so quickly when we have these large ideas of going to Mars or going to the moon, whatever it might be. And then also with going to Mars, there's other benefits as well. Of course, all the job supplies that it's going to be, doing. All 50 states are involved in the mission to Mars, building at least one component of something. So it's definitely a huge countrywide project, as well as any sort of resources we can bring back from Mars, or even just figuring out if Mars could possibly be a second place to live. If population continues to grow and in the future we need, some more resources, some more space, Mars could potentially be that. And we have to start kind of doing some of that research and figuring that out now, just because Mars is not the most habitable right now. So we kind of want to figure that out sooner rather than later.
So how many other young ladies, girls are in this program with you?
Well, so like the program that I'm in isn't necessarily like you have to go through this to become an astronaut, or it's definitely just something that I was able to do to kind of just start gaining some kinds of skills. So most of the people in the program are actually a whole lot older than I am. Some of them have careers in the space program, either working at different space centers. However, we have, since joining the program, I've kind of worked with them and gained some more like 18-year-olds and some more younger kids involved with the program. So there's another 18-year-old boy in the program with me who he may be looking at becoming an astronaut as well, but he's also really into flying particularly. I know there was another 18-year-old girl who recently did the program for the first time, kind of like the introductory program. So we're starting to see a few more younger folks kind of get involved with this kind of research and stuff, but then again, their aspirations kind of are all over the place just because there's so many different career opportunities within the space program.
Now, as part of your mission within this mission to get more girls into this program and let them realize that there's a real opportunity for them there?
Yeah, definitely. I think that in recent years we've started to see more female astronauts being selected, which of course has been so great to see that, in the selection process. Having more women getting selected has been awesome. However, there are tens of thousands of jobs within the space industry. And so I think the important thing to focus on is getting those girls across all tens of thousands of those jobs, engineers, engine testers, the people who prep the food for the International Space Station, all these jobs that aren't necessarily your typical jobs that we still have and are super important within the space program, kind of getting that, because there's so many times you can go to a space center and you'll meet some lady working there and she'll say that she's the only woman in her division, and it's just kind of hard to see that sometimes and that kind of gap. So I think it's just a push to continue having more of that diversity across kind of all the different centers.
Now, I know with the different trainings and everything you've done, it's taking you all over the world. What I want to hear two things, if they are different. What has been your highlight? And then I believe, and I don't even know what you call this, when you go up in the plane, the G-force that you're experiencing. No way. I believe you did that in Canada. I want to hear about that if that's not the highlight, but tell us about both those.
Yeah, I mean, definitely all the different trains that I've done through Project Possum and stuff has been pretty crazy. Like you said, they've kind of been kind of all over the place. A good bit of them, we do a lot of work in Canada, so a good bit of it is in Canada. So Montreal, Ottawa, kind of all over the place. But even just traveling in general so far, I've gotten to go to 26 different countries, which has been pretty crazy. So some of that is for training, and some of that was just for speaking, and then some of it was just some little countries that we hit in between while we were traveling. So it has been really awesome just to be able to travel with my dad and see different things. So I'm trying to think probably some of my favorites. I mean, Turkey would probably be a top place that we've been, just because we went to Izmir, which was more of just a fisherman town rather than a hustling city. So that was a whole lot of fun. We've been there several times now, been to the space camp over there, Space Camp Turkey, and just overall had such a fun time. It's just so different than what you would think it would be. I remember the people at Space Camp Turkey were asking us oh, is Turkey everything you expected? And we were we had literally no expectations. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. We didn't know if it would be good. We didn't know if it would be bad. We just didn't really know or have an idea of what Turkey would even be like. So that was definitely one of my favorites. And then also with the microgravity flight, obviously that was amazing. Just being able to feel weightless and kind of feel that sensation. It's definitely something that you just cannot have any other way, I would say. I mean, it definitely is that roller coaster feeling, when your butt just kind of lifts up from the seat for a quick second. So it's definitely that feeling, but it just feels really weird because it's extended. It's 20, 30 seconds. And so you're just when am I going down? Wait, this isn't, you're just so confused just because your body's not used to it. So yeah, it was definitely cool to be able to be a part of that and also be doing research at the same time, not just floating for fun, but actually contributing to something.
So when you get actually out into space and you're floating, how much time do you spend where you have to get used to that? When am I coming down?
Right. So usually astronauts spend the first couple of days kind of just adjusting to space, especially first-time astronauts. So there actually is space sickness. So it's kind of similar to car sickness, being seasick, except there's no really there's no correlation. So you get car sick, seasick, you get every kind of sick down here, but you wouldn't get space sick. So there's not really any way to tell. But really the main reason astronauts get that way is not necessarily because they are kind of confused about coming down, but it's just you go through a very huge fluid shift when you go to space. So a lot of your fluids like to rise for the first few days. And so your head gets kind of puffy, your shoulders kind of broad up, and then your legs are just very skinny. They kind of just shrink a little bit. So you just look a little goofy. You're just, some just don't really feel that great. But after 2, maybe 3 days, the fluids kind of shift and kind of adjust to being in space.
Can you just flip upside down and have the fluid go back up to your feet? Or
It doesn't quite work that way. So there's no up in space or any sort of thing like that. So sadly, we cannot fix it that easy.
Who is your hero?
There's so many, I would say. I mean, just so many of the astronauts that I've met. I don't think I've ever met an astronaut that has just not been supportive of other people wanting to get involved in the program, or just getting involved in science in general. They're such encouraging people, so it's always awesome to kind of hear their stories. I mean, I know one in particular for me was Sandra Magnus. So I met her when I was like at 9 or so, and she just really inspired me that it didn't matter how young I was, that I could still work towards my dream, because she had kind of decided at a younger age. And so just kind of seeing her being successful. So she was kind of just someone I really looked up to when I was younger. But as I've continued to meet more astronauts, they really paved the way for the next, recruits of astronauts. So it's really awesome just to kind of hear their stories, and then also, being inspired to follow in their footsteps.
It's funny, when the first elementary school, or the elementary school I went to in Tulsa, was the first elementary school that was named after an astronaut. It was named after Virgil Grissom. I went to Grissom Elementary School, and I remember being, oh gosh, what was it? Where we sat in the auditorium and watched the rockets go to the moon, and I was just a kid. and it was just also fascinating, but it just seemed so unreal, and to have that be a real, like, it never would have crossed my mind I could do that when I grow up, So that's just, I don't know, to me that's just so cool and so interesting just to see how things have evolved. So what, and this may sound a little crazy to even think beyond this. So once you go to Mars, you've done that. What do you have aspirations after that, or is?
Yeah, so I mean, after I go to Mars and kind of come back, and kind of that plan that's kind of laid out. So I wouldn't necessarily, I would most likely retire from the astronaut corps at that point. And that's mainly just because the mission to Mars is going to be such a lengthy mission. And in space, your bones get weaker, you lose bone density, your muscles are a lot weaker. And so coming back to Earth is kind of a bit of a hard adjustment, and coming back to that weight of gravity. But going back to space would kind of be pushing that more and more. And so after such a long mission, which is kind of the amount of time most astronauts spend going on several missions, I would most likely retire. So I'd probably either continue to kind of help out in the research that we bring back in any sort of way. So I'd kind of want to keep up with what's going on, continue to help the space program, and whether the next missions, or whether that's with research, or possibly just continuing to speak and inspire kids.
What is the length of the mission? I don't think we've covered that. How long will you be gone?
Yeah, so kind of the idea is that would be 6 months there, and then around 6 months back as well. So it's going to be at least a year. And then while we're on Mars, they're looking at all sorts of different lengths of time. I mean, they're thinking maybe 24 months, maybe not quite that long. But really the reason why astronauts are going to have to be there for such a long time, possibly 1 year, 1.5 years, is just because at Mars and the Earth don't orbit in perfect circles. So sometimes Mars is closer to us, and sometimes Mars is a lot further than us. And so basically when we launch, Mars will be at the closest point for us to actually get there. But we have to wait for all that to kind of realign in the solar system, which is kind of like a really big picture to think about. Yeah. But Mars just kind of has to, we have to kind of wait for it to kind of be close again to be able to come back, because if not, we would be spending so much time just kind of in that middle bit. It'd be way longer than 6 months to try to catch up to Mars. And so we kind of have to wait for that to realign. But obviously we don't know exactly how long that will take quite yet, several years down the road, but those are kind of the predictions.
What's the longest at this point that someone's lived on the International Space Station?
That's a good question. I know it's definitely been over a year. I'm trying to remember. I'm thinking, I'm totally going to get this wrong. I'm like guessing like 400, 500 days, something like that. But I mean, Scott Kelly did a year in space. That was like the research he did, because his twin brother is also an astronaut. So it was like a comparative study of him in space for a year, his brother on Earth for a year. So we've definitely pushed beyond a year and a half, most likely. But as we continue looking towards Mars, it's definitely going to be a big change, because all of those missions were kind of compositions of like multiple missions, so they weren't just necessarily in space for a year and a half. So going to Mars is going to be kind of way different, especially in terms of like bones and muscles and stuff. The good part is that actually on Mars we do have some gravity. It's not just like being in space and just turning to jello. We'll have some sort of gravity on Mars to kind of help with working out. Is going to be much more effective to kind of keep our muscles strong.
Interesting.
Share with me a little bit about your dad's role. From what I've read and heard, I think you two are quite close, and he's played a big role.
Yeah, I mean, my dad is like a single father, so me and my dad kind of did everything together pretty much. And so when I kind of started talking about wanting to be an astronaut and all these things, of course, he was just like, oh, sure, you can kind of do whatever you want, which he didn't really take it too seriously. But no, my dad was super supportive kind of from the beginning. So, for example, like the first time I went to space camp, I was a little on the younger side. So we did kind of like a family camp. So my dad had to come with me, which meant that he had to ride all the simulators and he had to do all the simulated missions. So he was kind of thrown into it from the beginning. So now he's obviously learned a lot more about space, more than he ever thought he would need to know. And then, of course, he's traveled with me everywhere I've gone to go. So we've gotten to just experience so many unique things together and doing all of this, not only space related, but also just traveling related and just getting to spend time together. So he also keeps me very on schedule, because there's just so much going on. He has like his little what am I trying to say? Like hand calendar, like physical
scheduler
calendar that he like has, and like pencils in and like pins in everything to make sure everything is all good. So yeah, I definitely couldn't keep on top of everything without him.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah, my father worked for American Airlines and was an engineer, and he's still alive. He unfortunately has dementia now, but he was on a team that designed, and I always call it the wrong thing. I call it a linear altimeter, but that's not what it is. But it's the thing on airplanes that goes whoop whoop, pull up so you don't crash into a mountain. I don't know if they use it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's
evolved
since, but yeah, this is back. My dad that he created that in 1965 or something, and got a Distinguished Service Award. So I grew up on airplanes, and I always wanted to learn how to fly an airplane. Never did it, And I'm like, listening to everything you've done. Like, well, you've done more in 19 years than I've done in 59 years. But like back then, the 747 was brand new when I was like 9 years old, and before they could fly it, we had to. Our family was one of the families that got on it to test, not just in the ground in a hangar, an emergency situation, getting everybody off of a 2-story airplane in a timely manner and going down the slides and everything, and how, I don't know how exciting that was. And I just think, God, that was only 50 years ago. And I don't know, it just blows my mind how much everything has evolved.
It's pretty crazy, because it really hasn't been that long since we sent the first American man into space, and it's pretty crazy to see how much we've achieved in the space program so far. So
yeah, and you think about like when I was in high school, we didn't even have microwaves. I got my first microwave in it was like 1979. I didn't get my first cell phone until I was 36.
As I grew up, the space shuttle was a regular thing. I've watched so many shuttle launches and reentries, and I don't even remember what it was at this time, but I remember sending my stuff in, and they send me the package of being a young astronaut thing. That's as far as I got. But then when they retired the space shuttle program, a lot of things have fallen out of the limelight. And then when they went private with people like Elon Musk, it's bringing it out more. And now with what we've just recently seen with the Americans going back up, it's creating some more excitement around it again, which is great, I think. So tell us, if someone, a 3-year-old like you were, or even an 18-year-old, is listening to this and is interested or thinks this is exciting, what do they do?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's all about kind of figuring out kind of the way you want to do it, just because there are so many different ways to become an astronaut. You can be a pilot, you can study science, you can study medicine, not only like all the different types of majors you can actually go into. So first it's really just figuring out, what you would want to do, because you can't go to college to become an astronaut. Sadly, that's not a thing we
It's not a
have.
major.
Yeah, it's not something we have quite yet. So you do have to kind of like find a career that you would, happily do here on Earth. So like, for example, I'm studying astrobiology. And so, we could easily just become an astrobiologist here on Earth if I would like to. And so after you kind of figure out an idea of some kind of track you want to go down, it's then just building on top of that any sort of extracurricular. So for example, if you're interested in engineering, maybe, in high school you start, different building projects that were super successful and you can eventually put on a resume, or going to, maybe a robotics competition, or just finding ways to relate to what interests you. If you're more into rocketry, maybe, start by building model rockets and then looking to see maybe there's larger rockets you can get into. And so it's definitely just starting really small, starting kind of in your local area, whether that's going to a museum or something like that, and then just kind of building off of what you're interested in doing. But a huge thing that I would definitely say is just really talking about your dreams and what you want to do. Because, for example, let's say you go to that museum and you tell someone there you want to be an astronaut. They can say, oh, I happen to know someone who works at NASA, or, whatever it might be. You never really know where the opportunities are going to come from. So it's super important to tell people that you're interested in being an engineer, being an astronaut, working in the space program, whatever it might be. So start by just sharing your story and your own dreams. And a lot of people are always encouraging to get more kids involved in the space industry. So just continue talking about it and continuing looking for whatever you might be able to get.
I love that one thing about your father that you said was that he never said, oh, that's silly, you can't do that. It was kind of like, okay, you can be whatever you want. And I think that's huge. I think just the fact that that in your youth, at that formative age, nobody ever said, you can't do that. And so you went through life going, I can do this. And I just think that's tremendous. And it's a big lesson, I think, to parents who are listening to this, to allow your kids to dream, because look where they could end up.
Absolutely. I agree with that, because how many 3-year-olds say, I want to go to Mars, Dad, and it gets laughed off and shoved in the corner.
Right.
And, as you're talking about sharing your dreams and talking to people about it. And I think that's so vital, because, there's so many things that are achievable that haven't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get shut down, they're not going to happen. So I love, obviously from a young age, you've been a big thinker, and I think that's incredible. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so all of, I guess, my social media, website, whatever, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, this, that, and the other, is kind of all under NASA Blueberry. Some of them have ones afterward, but NASA Blueberry should be fine to get you started on the hunt.
What's a quick question that I did have is, where did the blueberry word come from? Just from your suit? Or your...
Yeah, so Blueberry is kind of like my call sign, which is kind of like a nickname. So basically, when the second time I went to space camp, I wanted one of the blue flight suits that everyone was wearing, because I wanted to be an astronaut, so I wanted to look like one. However, I was like really short and really young at the time, and so they didn't have any in my size. So my dad ended up finding me like this really like knockoff, like kind of changey looking one, and it was just a really dark shade of blue and just not really the right color. It just didn't really go very well, so everyone told me I looked like a blueberry while wearing it. And so they would say, Blueberry, do this, Blueberry, do that. And then I was like, okay, whatever. And then I came back the next year to space camp, and they were like, oh, it's Blueberry. And I was like, okay, so this is still going. Anyway, so it ended up just kind of sticking. And so we kind of just kept it, didn't fight it anymore, and just rolled with it.
Love it.
I'm on one of your sites right now, and I love a quote that's here by you. It says, "Always follow your dreams, and don't let anyone take it from you." I really love that. And then the other, your tagline is, "We are the Mars generation." This has been a pleasure talking to you. It's been a great opportunity, and I really look forward to the day that we get to watch it when you are on your way to Mars to make this all happen. So,
That's so
thank
exciting.
you for spending time with us. This is a really exciting and a really neat story.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all about, sharing and teaching so many more people about what's going on in the space program and the ideas of the future space program. Because, I definitely believe that so much of what we do in space comes from public interest. I think right now we have a pretty strong push, and, Mars being talked about in movies and TV shows and this, that, and the other, that we kind of have that public interest kind of slowly creeping in to support us. So I definitely think, the more people we can get even interested, not even necessarily involved, but just interested in seeing it happen, we're going to do it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for being with us, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Hey, thanks for being with us. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope you'll go out there and share it for us. And please go visit our websites, jeffhagee.com and ecibfs.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. See ya.